There's a moment most men never talk about. It doesn't happen at the doctor's office. It doesn't happen in front of anyone. It happens in private, maybe in the bathroom, maybe lying in bed in the dark, when a man in his 60s or 70s looks at himself and realizes, quietly and without ceremony, that something he once took for granted is gone. Not fading, gone. And in that moment, he doesn't think about cholesterol numbers or blood pressure readings. He thinks about who he used to be. He thinks about his wife. He thinks about whether this is just the rest of his life now. If that moment sounds familiar, I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you is something most men your age have never been told. And the reason they've never been told it has nothing to do with medicine being unavailable, and everything to do with the fact that no one ever thought to look at a simple breakfast seed that costs almost nothing and has been sitting in grocery stores for decades. I'm Dr. Mei Anderson. I'm a urologist, and for over 20 years I have worked almost exclusively with men over 60 whose bodies stopped responding the way they wanted them to. Men who came into my office defeated. Men who had already tried the pills, already heard the phrase, "It's just your age," already started quietly accepting a version of their lives that felt like a long, slow goodbye to something essential. And I'm going to tell you right now, before we get into anything else, that for the vast majority of those men, it was not their age. It was their arteries. Specifically, the tiny arteries responsible for blood flow to the penis, arteries that are among the smallest in the body, and therefore among the first to become blocked, narrowed, and dysfunctional as we get older. And the reason those arteries were struggling had a very specific, very reversible cause that almost no one talks about. Before I show you what that cause is and how this one breakfast seed works against it at a biological level, I want to ask you something directly. If what you're experiencing, whether that's weaker erections, slower arousal, less firmness than you used to have, or mornings that no longer start the way they once did, if any of that resonates, type the number 1 in the comments right now. I read every comment on this channel. Every single one. And your response helps me understand what men are actually going through, so I can keep making content that genuinely serves you. If this isn't your situation, type 0. That's completely fine. But I suspect more men watching this will type 1 than 0. Now, let's talk about what's actually happening inside your body, because understanding the mechanism is the first step to reversing it. And what I'm going to describe in the next few minutes will completely change the way you think about erectile function, aging, and what's actually possible for your body right now. Your erections depend on one thing above everything else: blood flow. Not hormones alone, not nerve signals alone, not psychological confidence alone, although all of those matter. The foundational requirement for a firm erection is an adequate volume of blood moving rapidly into the erectile tissue of the penis through vessels that are relaxed, open, and responsive. When those vessels are working properly, the process happens automatically, effortlessly, the way it did when you were younger. When those vessels are compromised, when the inner lining of those tiny arteries has become inflamed, stiffened, or narrowed, the blood simply cannot get there fast enough or in sufficient volume to produce the firmness and staying power you once had. Now here is what most men, and honestly what many doctors, get wrong about this. They assume the problem is primarily hormonal. Low testosterone, they say. Take this gel, take that injection, and things will improve. And sometimes testosterone is part of the picture. But I have tested the testosterone levels of hundreds of men in their 60s and 70s who came to me with erectile dysfunction, and a striking number of them had testosterone levels that were perfectly adequate. The problem wasn't what their bodies were producing. The problem was delivery, the plumbing, the state of those microscopic vessels, and specifically, the health of a single-cell layer that lines the inside of every blood vessel in your body, a layer called the endothelium. When the endothelium is healthy, it produces a molecule called nitric oxide. You've perhaps heard this term before, but let me tell you what it actually does in plain language. Nitric oxide is the biological signal that tells your blood vessels to relax and widen. It is the direct chemical trigger for the vasodilation that allows blood to rush into the erectile tissue and create an erection. Without adequate nitric oxide, your blood vessels stay partially constricted. They tighten rather than open. And no amount of arousal, no level of testosterone, no degree of desire can fully compensate for blood vessels that refuse to dilate properly. What damages the endothelium and reduces nitric oxide production? Inflammation. Oxidative stress. The slow accumulation of inflammatory compounds in the vessel walls that, over years and decades, progressively degrades the endothelium's ability to do its job. And this process doesn't announce itself with symptoms you can feel. It happens silently, gradually, until one day the response is noticeably weaker, and the man in the bathroom at 2 in the morning starts wondering what happened to him. I want to tell you about a patient of mine. His name was Gerald. He was 71 years old when he first came to see me, and he had the kind of face that told you everything before he said a word. A man who had spent 2 years carrying something heavy and alone. Gerald had been married for 43 years. He described his wife as his best friend, and he told me, in a voice that was very controlled and very quiet, that they hadn't been physically intimate in almost 18 months. Not because she had stopped wanting that connection, because he had started avoiding any situation that might lead to it, because the shame of what kept happening, or rather, what kept failing to happen, had become worse than the absence itself. Gerald had tried the pharmaceutical route. It had helped somewhat, inconsistently, and with side effects that made him feel like his heart was racing and his face was on fire. His doctor had adjusted dosages twice. The results were unpredictable. He was tired of it. He wanted to know if there was something that actually addressed the underlying problem rather than papering over it with a chemical signal every time. I told Gerald what I'm going to tell you now. There was. And it began with something he could eat for breakfast every morning. Pumpkin seeds. This is the seed I want to talk to you about today. Not as a curiosity, not as a folk remedy, but as one of the most nutritionally dense, vascular health-targeted foods available to an aging male body. And one whose mechanisms for improving erectile function are now backed by a substantial and growing body of clinical research that most men will never read because it's buried in urology journals rather than in the places men actually look for answers. Let me tell you what is inside a small handful of raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds, and why each component matters for the specific biological problem we've been discussing. Because this is not a food that helps erections in a vague, general way. It helps them through precise, measurable biological mechanisms, and once you understand those mechanisms, you'll understand why eating these seeds every morning can begin changing things in ways that a pill taken before intimacy simply cannot replicate. The first mechanism is zinc. Pumpkin seeds are one of the richest dietary sources of zinc on the planet. A single ounce contains more zinc than almost any other plant food you can name. And zinc is not merely important for testosterone production, although it is critical for that. Zinc plays a direct role in the function of the endothelium, the vessel lining we discussed a few minutes ago. Research published in the journal Nutrients has demonstrated that zinc deficiency significantly impairs endothelial nitric oxide synthase activity. That is the enzyme responsible for producing the nitric oxide that tells your blood vessels to open. When zinc levels are low, that enzyme operates at reduced capacity. Nitric oxide production falls. Vessel dilation becomes sluggish. And the cascade of blood flow that should follow arousal becomes partial, slow, and inconsistent. After the age of 60, your ability to absorb zinc from food decreases by up to 40% compared to when you were younger. Which means even men eating what they believe to be a balanced diet are very often chronically deficient in the mineral that their endothelium most needs to function. Pumpkin seeds correct that deficiency, not gradually over months, measurably within weeks of consistent daily consumption. But zinc is only the beginning. Pumpkin seeds are one of the most concentrated plant sources of an amino acid called L-arginine. If you've heard of L-arginine before, it's likely in the context of circulation supplements, and for good reason. L-arginine is the direct precursor to nitric oxide. Your body converts it through a specific enzymatic pathway into the exact molecule your blood vessels need to dilate and allow blood flow. Clinical studies have shown that dietary L-arginine supplementation improves endothelial function, reduces arterial stiffness, and enhances blood flow to the pelvic region. All of which translate, in practical terms, to improved erectile quality. What's important to understand is that getting L-arginine from whole food rather than isolated supplements means your body receives it alongside the cofactors, the zinc, the magnesium, the antioxidants, that allow it to be used most efficiently. The seed is, in a very real sense, a complete delivery system. And then there is the magnesium. Most men over 60 are deficient in magnesium. Studies suggest up to 68% of older American adults fail to meet the recommended daily intake, and the consequences of that deficiency for vascular health are profound. Magnesium directly regulates the tone of smooth muscle in artery walls. When magnesium levels are adequate, those muscles relax. The arteries stay supple and open. When magnesium is chronically low, those muscles tighten. Arteries become stiffer, less responsive, and less capable of the rapid vasodilation that erections require. 1 ounce of pumpkin seeds delivers nearly 40% of your recommended daily magnesium intake. Eat them consistently, and you are directly addressing one of the most common and most overlooked contributors to erectile dysfunction in older men. This is where I want to pause for a moment, because I realize that what I've been describing might sound almost too straightforward. A seed. A breakfast food. Something that costs a few dollars and can be bought in any supermarket. And I know how that sounds, because Gerald had that same expression on his face when I first explained it to him. He had come to a urologist expecting something complicated, a specialist protocol, perhaps a new medication, a procedure of some kind. And here I was describing something he could find in the baking aisle. He agreed to try it. Specifically, I asked him to eat 1 to 2 ounces of raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds every morning with his breakfast, consistently every single day, for 6 weeks without skipping. Not as a cure, as a foundation. A way of giving his endothelium the specific raw materials it needed to begin repairing itself. I want to tell you what happened at his 6-week follow-up, but before I do, I want to share one more piece of the science, because this particular mechanism is the one that surprised me most when I first encountered it in the research, and it's the reason pumpkin seeds work not just on blood flow, but on the specific type of arterial blockage that accumulates in the penile arteries of men over 60. There is a compound found abundantly in pumpkin seeds called cucurbitine, alongside a family of phytosterols, plant-based sterols, that have been shown in multiple studies to reduce what researchers call oxidized LDL. Now you've heard LDL referred to as bad cholesterol, but the more accurate picture is this. LDL itself is not the primary problem. Oxidized LDL, LDL particles that have been damaged by free radicals and reactive oxygen species, is what triggers the inflammatory cascade inside artery walls that leads to plaque formation, narrowing of vessels, and impaired blood flow. The penile arteries are particularly vulnerable to this process because they are so small, roughly 1 millimeter or 2 in diameter, that even a modest accumulation of oxidative inflammation can significantly restrict flow. The phytosterols in pumpkin seeds interfere with this oxidation process at multiple points. They compete with cholesterol for absorption in the intestinal wall, reducing the overall burden on your arterial lining. They reduce circulating inflammatory markers, and they appear to specifically support the health of the endothelial cells in smaller vessels, the exact vessels most relevant to erectile function. When you put this together, the zinc-restoring nitric oxide enzyme function, the L-arginine providing the raw material for nitric oxide production, the magnesium relaxing arterial smooth muscle, and the phytosterols reducing the oxidative inflammation that has been quietly narrowing those tiny vessels for years. What you have is a single food that addresses erectile dysfunction at its actual biological root, rather than masking the symptom for a few hours at a time. This is also a good moment, if you're finding this information useful, to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. I'm Dr. Mei Anderson, and this is Vital Health Seniors, a channel built specifically for men over 60 who want evidence-based answers to the questions they're not always comfortable asking their GP. I post regularly, and everything I share here is grounded in the same research I bring to my clinical practice. If you've been watching for a while and haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. It costs you nothing, and it means you won't miss what's coming next. Now, Gerald. At his 6-week follow-up, Gerald sat across from me looking different. Not dramatically, visibly transformed. That kind of story belongs to pharmaceutical advertisements. But different in the specific, quiet way that men change when something they had stopped expecting to return has started to come back. He told me that in the 3rd week, he had noticed what he described as more of a response in the mornings. By the 4th week, his wife had noticed something too, not specifically the physical change, but a shift in how he was with her. More present. Less withdrawn. He had stopped bracing himself for disappointment, and that change in his demeanor had opened something between them that the withdrawal had been closing for nearly 2 years. By 6 weeks, he told me, they had been intimate twice. Not perfectly, not the way it had been 20 years ago, but genuinely, satisfyingly, in a way that made him feel. And I'm going to use his exact words here because they've stayed with me. Like I got something back that I thought was just gone. I have seen versions of Gerald's story more times than I can count. And every time, the surprise is the same. Not that a seed changed everything overnight, but that the body responds so much faster to proper nourishment than these men believed was possible. Because their bodies were not broken. They were starved of specific, targeted nutrition that the aging male vasculature depends on. And no one had ever told them what to give it. I do want to be completely clear about one thing, because I believe this deeply and I think it's important. The pumpkin seed protocol I'm describing is not a substitute for medical care. If you are experiencing significant erectile dysfunction, especially if it's sudden or accompanied by other cardiovascular symptoms, please see your doctor. Erectile dysfunction is frequently an early warning sign of broader vascular disease, and that conversation needs to happen with a physician who can assess your full picture. What I'm describing today is a foundational nutritional intervention that supports vascular health, not a treatment for an underlying medical condition that requires diagnosis and care. Now, I also want to talk to you about something that most people who discuss pumpkin seeds get completely wrong, because the way you consume them matters almost as much as whether you consume them. Raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds, also called pepitas, are what you want, not roasted. Here's why. The high heat involved in commercial roasting degrades a significant portion of the zinc and damages the delicate polyunsaturated fatty acids in the seed that support anti-inflammatory pathways. Studies comparing the antioxidant activity of raw versus roasted pumpkin seeds consistently show that raw seeds retain substantially higher levels of the active compounds we've been discussing. If you genuinely cannot tolerate raw seeds, lightly toasting them yourself at home at a low temperature, below 300 degrees Fahrenheit, for no more than 15 minutes, preserves more of their nutritional integrity than commercial high-heat processing. The amount matters too. 1 to 2 ounces daily, roughly a small handful, about 30 grams, is the dose supported by the research. More is not meaningfully better and adds unnecessary calories. Less, consumed inconsistently, won't produce the sustained vascular changes we're after. The key is regularity. Daily. With breakfast. This is not a supplement you take when you remember. It's a habit you build because you understand exactly what it's doing inside your vascular system every single morning. Pairing matters. Pumpkin seeds eaten alongside a small amount of healthy fat, a few slices of avocado, a drizzle of olive oil over eggs, a small handful of walnuts, enhances the absorption of their fat-soluble antioxidant compounds. Many of the phytosterols and carotenoids in pumpkin seeds are lipophilic, meaning they dissolve in fat, and are taken up by your intestinal wall through the fat-mediated absorption pathway. Eat them with fat, and your body extracts significantly more of the active compounds. Eat them in isolation on an empty stomach, and a meaningful portion passes through without being fully utilized. There is also a timing consideration that I think is worth understanding. Your body's natural testosterone production follows a circadian rhythm. It peaks during sleep and in the early morning hours. This is why healthy men have erections in the morning. It's a sign that the testosterone production cycle is functioning, and that overnight vascular repair has been taking place. When you consume pumpkin seeds at breakfast, the zinc and L-arginine they provide are available to your body precisely during the window when your cells are recovering from the night's hormonal activity and preparing for the demands of the day. This alignment between nutritional timing and biological rhythm is not incidental. It's the reason that consistent morning consumption tends to produce better results than consuming the same seeds at other times of day. I had another patient. His name was Theodore. He was 68, a retired civil engineer from the Pacific Northwest, who came to me about a year after Gerald. Theodore's situation was slightly different. He didn't have the same degree of erectile dysfunction Gerald had experienced. His concern was what he described as a gradual reduction in firmness, and in the duration of his erections over the previous 3 years. Nothing had disappeared, but enough had changed that he noticed it, and more importantly, his wife noticed it, and the awareness of that had started to introduce a kind of performance anxiety that was making things worse. He was caught in a cycle where the awareness of the change was amplifying the change itself. Theodore was also dealing with persistent fatigue, interrupted sleep, and what he described as a general flatness to his energy that he'd never experienced before 65. When I looked at his diet, the pattern was common. A high-carbohydrate breakfast, very little dietary zinc or magnesium, and essentially no intentional consumption of foods that support vascular health. His body had the desire. It had most of the hormonal capacity. What it lacked was the raw material to deliver blood flow reliably. I put Theodore on the same morning protocol, 1.5 ounces of raw pumpkin seeds with his breakfast, every day, paired with 2 eggs and half an avocado. For weeks in, he emailed me unprompted, something patients rarely do, to say that his sleep had improved noticeably, and that he was waking up with more consistent morning erections than he'd had in years. He used the phrase, like the lights came back on. These are not miracles. They are predictable biological responses to targeted nutritional restoration in a system that was operating under specific, correctable deficiencies. The body, even at 60, 70, and beyond, retains its capacity to respond when you give it what it needs. The research does not suggest that this capacity disappears with age. What changes with age is how diligently we must meet the body's requirements. Because the margin for deficiency shrinks. When you were 35, your body could compensate for a zinc-poor breakfast or a magnesium-deficient diet and still function well. At 65, that compensation becomes less available. The systems run closer to the edge. And a small, consistent daily intervention makes a correspondingly larger difference. I want to speak for a moment to the men watching this who are on the higher end of the age range I've been discussing. The men who are 70, 75, 80. Because I know there is a voice that speaks to men at that age that says the window has closed, that the body is too far down the path to reverse anything meaningful, that vitality, desire, and physical responsiveness are for younger men, and that accepting their absence is simply what dignity looks like at this stage of life. I disagree with that voice completely, and I disagree with it based on what I have seen in my clinic over 2 decades of practice. Arterial tissue retains its capacity for improvement well into the 8th and 9th decade of life. The endothelium, that inner lining of the blood vessels, responds to nutritional support regardless of age. Zinc deficiency can be corrected in a 75-year-old man, just as effectively as in a 50-year-old man, and the vascular improvements that follow the correction are measurable in both. The mechanism does not respect the calendar on the wall. It responds to what you put in your body this morning, and tomorrow morning, and the morning after that. What changes as you age is the timeline and the expectations. A 60-year-old man following this protocol may notice changes in 3 to 4 weeks. A 75-year-old man may need 6 to 8 weeks before the improvements are consistently noticeable. But consistently noticeable they become, because the biology does not fundamentally change, only the pace at which it responds. I also want to address something that sits underneath a lot of the conversations I have with men in my clinic, and that I suspect sits underneath why many of you are watching this video. This is not, at its heart, just about erections. I know that's what the title promises, and I've delivered on that promise. The seed, the mechanism, the science, the patient stories. But the men who come to see me are not primarily seeking a harder erection. They're seeking the confidence, the connection, and the sense of identity that goes with knowing their body still works. They're seeking the ability to be present with their partners without the shadow of anticipated failure hanging over every intimate moment. They're seeking the feeling of being a man who is still fully alive, still capable, still worth something as a physical, passionate, engaged human being. And when I watch men reclaim that feeling, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, it is one of the most profound things I get to witness in this work. Theodore's wife told him, 8 weeks into the protocol, that he seemed like himself again. Not a younger version of himself. Himself. The man she had married. Present, confident, unhurried, and unafraid. That is what this is really about. 1 ounce of raw pumpkin seeds, every morning with breakfast and a source of healthy fat. That's the starting place. Not the entire answer to every aspect of male health after 60. Your sleep, your stress levels, your overall diet, your blood pressure, your exercise. All of those matter, and I'll keep making videos about all of them. But for the specific, precise, measurable problem of penile artery health and the blood flow that determines erectile quality, this seed provides a targeted, bioavailable, naturally synergistic intervention that addresses the root cause rather than the symptom. Give it 6 weeks. Be consistent. And pay attention to what changes. Not just in the bedroom, but in your energy in the mornings, in the ease of your breathing, in the quality of your sleep, and in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're doing something real for your body. Before I go, I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment below telling me this. When did you first notice a change in your energy or your sexual vitality? What age were you? And what did you notice first? I ask because the answers are always different, and because the men who read through the comments on this channel often tell me that reading other men's experiences was what finally helped them feel less alone with something they'd been carrying in silence for years. So share your story if you're willing. You might be the reason someone else keeps watching, keeps trying, and keeps believing that it's not too late. If this video helped you today, please hit the like button. It helps this content reach other men who are searching for exactly what you just found. Subscribe to Vital Health Seniors if you haven't already, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.